money, power, and, that terrifying little reality of our own mortality. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a seriously profound ancient text that hits right at the heart of our deepest existential anxieties. We're talking about our modern obsessions with financial success, the endless hustle for power, and what actually happens when the clock finally runs out. It's absolutely wild how a lyric written thousands of years ago can speak so directly and honestly so sharply to the exact same stress we feel when we check our bank accounts today. We're skipping the long intros today and jumping right into the core of this ancient riddle. The text hits us with a huge question right out of the gate. Why should we be intimidated by the oppressive wealth of others? Seriously, have you ever felt that? That creeping sense of anxiety, or maybe even a little envy when you see someone else stacking up massive amounts of wealth. Maybe they're playing dirty, stepping on others to get there, and you're just left sitting there wondering why they seem to be winning at life. That very specific, very human tension, that's exactly what this text wants to figure out for us. So the author of Psalm 49, they don't just quietly clear their throat and begin. No, they grab a metaphorical megaphone. "Hear this, all peoples," they write. "Give ear, all inhabitants of the world." Basically, it doesn't matter what your tax bracket is, what your zip code is, or how much clout you have. The writer is signaling that this revelation is an absolute, non-negotiable truth of the human experience, and literally every single person needs to hear it. The actual text we're decoding today is from the English Standard Version of Psalm 49. It's this ancient lyric credited to a musical group known as the Sons of Korah. They were prominent temple musicians and singers. And right at the beginning, in verse 4, the narrator makes this super unique promise. They say they're going to solve a riddle for us. And get this, they're going to set it to the music of a lyre, which is an ancient stringed instrument. So it's not framed as some dry, dusty lecture. It's a poetic, musical unlocking of a deep human mystery. And this brilliantly shows us that the wisdom we're about to uncover isn't just for some niche, elite group. The author purposefully calls out to everybody, the high and the low, the rich and the poor. They are completely leveling the playing field before the main argument even starts. This is a universal truth. It applies just as heavily to the billionaire chilling in a luxury penthouse as it does to the person working 3 jobs just struggling to make rent. We are all bound by the exact same ultimate rules. Which brings us right to the core issue, the problem of trusting in wealth. In verses 5 and 6, the narrator asks why they should fear in times of trouble when the iniquity of those who cheat them surrounds them. They are specifically calling out people who put their absolute, unquestioning trust in their money and who arrogantly brag about the sheer abundance of their riches. It's that classic problem, right? The wealthy oppressor who genuinely believes their money makes them untouchable. And that leads us straight into the great illusion of control. When someone has enough money to buy whatever they want, yachts, tech companies, political influence, they start to feel entirely invincible. But this ancient riddle poses a piercing, completely unavoidable question that shatters that illusion. Can a massive fortune actually buy off the one thing we all inevitably face? In other words, can you pay off death? Well, the crucial point is stated pretty plainly in verse 7. No man can ransom another. Despite all their loud boasting and despite the endless abundance of their riches, no human being has the financial capital to pay God the price of a life. When it comes to the ultimate final ledger of human existence, earthly currency is literally worthless. You simply cannot buy a buyout clause for your soul. No way. The text actually lays out this harsh reality in an incredibly methodical, airtight way. First, it points out that the ransom for a human life is just unimaginably costly. And because of that sky-high valuation, a mere financial payment could never, ever suffice. So the inescapable conclusion? No one, no matter how rich, no matter how influential, can pay to live forever and avoid the pit. It doesn't matter how much you've got stashed in your stock portfolio or your crypto wallet, your net worth simply cannot cover the cost of immortality. So, if wealth can't buy eternity, what exactly does it do in the end? Well, it leaves us with death as the great equalizer. Let's see how this builds into what is honestly the starkest reality check in the entire text, stripping away all those comforting little lies we tell ourselves about success and permanence. Verse 10 breaks humanity down into 3 distinct groups: the wise, the foolish, and, rather bluntly, the stupid. But look at their fate. They all die. They all perish. And in every single case, what happens to their earthly riches? They leave their wealth to others. Whether you lived with incredible financial wisdom, meticulously planning every single investment, or you lived with absolute foolishness, this text hits us with a profound irony. You amass a fortune just to hand the keys over to someone else the exact moment you die. What's truly fascinating about this next part is how openly the text mocks human vanity. Think about modern tech tycoons, right? Or historical conquerors who slap their names on skyscrapers, sprawling estates and huge tracts of land, hoping for some kind of immortality. The text calls this a complete delusion. It says their only actual permanent real estate, their quote-unquote dwelling place to all generations, is the grave. The earth reclaims them, regardless of whose name was printed on the deed.
From there, the poem takes a pretty chilling turn. It drops us into this hushed, really intense meditation on the ultimate destination for people who place their foolish confidence in their money, and it introduces us to the Shepherd of Sheol.
Now, just for some quick context, Sheol is the dark, permanent dwelling place of the dead in ancient Hebrew literature. The text uses this term to paint a really bleak, haunting picture of an underworld where all earthly form is consumed. It's a place where all the pomp, the circumstance, and the superficial riches of the world above are rendered completely and utterly meaningless. It's such a sobering contrast to the loud, arrogant boasting of the wealthy oppressors we talked about earlier.
And that brings us to verse 14, which is arguably one of the most striking and memorable metaphors of the whole passage. Like sheep, they are appointed for Sheol. Death shall be their shepherd. Think about that. Those who thought they were the aggressive wolves of Wall Street, the untouchable masters of the universe, trusting in their wealth, they're suddenly revealed to be nothing more than helpless sheep. And they aren't being led by a loving, protective guide. No, they are herded blindly into the dark by death itself.
But right in the middle of this dark, inevitable reality, we hit a turning point: true security. The tone of the psalm shifts completely. The narrator steps in to reveal the actual solution to his musical riddle. Because if all our earthly wealth and hustling can't save us from the pit, what possibly can? The text presents us with two distinctly different paths here. On one hand, we have the tragic end of those who trust in earthly wealth, appointed for Sheol, herded by death, their forms consumed with nowhere left to dwell. But on the other hand, we see the psalmist's hope in verse 15. The text says, "But God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me." Remember how verse 7 said no human could ever pay the ransom for a life? Well, here is the breathtaking answer. God himself will provide the ultimate ransom. That, right there, is where true, lasting security is found.
So let's talk about practical wisdom for today. Knowing all of this, how do we actually apply this ancient riddle to our lives right now? How does it help us manage our daily modern anxieties about status, about inflation, or, that nagging feeling of envy when we see a rival getting ahead financially?
In verse 16, the ancient poet commands us directly. Be not afraid when a man becomes rich, when the glory of his house increases. It's a direct instruction to just drop the anxiety, drop the intimidation, and drop the envy when you see a modern crypto bro flexing online, or an influencer whose social glory is absolutely skyrocketing. You don't need to be afraid or jealous of it, because now you understand the hollow reality behind it all.
Because here is the final reality check drawn from verses 17 to 19. Look, a wealthy person might count themselves highly blessed while they're alive. They might get a ton of praise and adoration from society for doing so well for themselves, but when they die, they carry absolutely nothing away. As the old saying goes, you never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. Their glory and their massive bank accounts, they just do not follow them into the afterlife. Their soul simply joins the generations before them who never see the light again. And that brings us to the final verse of the psalm, verse 20. It leaves us with his unforgettable mic drop moment. Man in his pomp, yet without understanding, is like the beasts that perish. If you have all the pomp, all the wealth, and all the status in the world, but you lack the profound spiritual understanding that God alone holds your ransom, well, your life is ultimately equated to that of an unthinking animal that simply dies and fades away into the dirt. So, knowing that you absolutely cannot buy your way out of the grave, what kind of legacy are you choosing to build today? Are you chasing fleeting pomp that you'll inevitably just leave behind for someone else? Or are you seeking the true understanding that actually secures your soul? It's a riddle worth solving in your own life. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep seeking that true understanding.